And we're presently in sidebar. I think right now the prosecution is asking the question of what is a snitch, which I'm not exactly confident how that's relevant in this case, but obviously the judge is going to make a ruling and make that decision. I'm here for a few moments, hopefully, with Mr. Koribanics, who is a former prosecutor and present criminal defense attorney. What do you take of the word snitch and how that's relevant in any way to this case?
I'm a little baffled by the way that the direct examination is just picking words out of the air, it seems, and throwing it. I don't see the connection here or there's any foundation. I just find it a little bizarre. Usually defense people ask what a snitch is.
Exactly. It looks like they're going back, so I think we're going to be able to step back into the courtroom and find out what the answer to snitch is, if the judge allows it. And we're watching the testimony of a detective who's testifying about various items that were recovered from a vehicle, and now he's on cross-examination speaking about the text messages that were observed on one of the phones that were recovered in this case. Again, this is Florida v. Armando Baptista. I'm here with Mr. Koribanics, who is an attorney out of New Jersey and also practices federal criminal defense in New York as well. And so one of the things I think we've been talking about is, you know, the fact that the prosecution may not be, at least as far, I don't know if she's not as experienced, or, you know, the questions don't seem to be flowing as they should. And I think one of the things I think the jurors and those watching have to understand is that, you know, the prosecution must prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. And they have to prove that the defendant is the person that committed this crime. So one does sometimes wonder, and perhaps you can explain why it is, if this is a case in which the defense has basically said he was there, it's just self-defense, why it is that the prosecution is kind of going down the road of still proving that it was him that was involved in this case.
Well, you know, I've been wondering this because I don't know if it's a young prosecutor in the case, but like you used a very good word, flow. I mean, on both sides, prosecutor and defense, we like to establish a rhythm in our case. And it's really dangerous when the prosecutors put on so much evidence that you lose the rhythm of your case. And it's sort of like this witness is very disjointed. He looks like he wants to be somewhere else. I don't even know, like, where you start cross-examining him because there's no rhythm to jump onto. It's just like out of the blue, like snitch. I'm still trying to figure out where that word came from.
I agree. We're going to take a break and we'll be right back. Thanks. And the detective has just taken the stand and testified. And one of the, I think, the biggest things he testified to, if you were able to catch it, is that a red Solo cup was in fact recovered during this investigation, not at the actual crime scene, but at a different area. And obviously the reason this means so much is that the prosecution's main witness, the girlfriend of the deceased Wendy Gembalis, had testified that her boyfriend, the deceased, had gone to the defendant's vehicle holding a red Solo cup with the intent to shake hands. And so I'm here with Mr. Koribanics to talk a little bit about that. Now, I mean, in terms of the way red Solo cups work, I mean, if you went down my street, you would find 50 that came out of my house. So I don't think that it's so uncommon to find a red Solo cup, you know, if you're driving within a 1 mile radius, but it certainly is helpful in giving some corroboration to the main witness's testimony that it was a red cup versus a broken beer bottle.
Well, I think it doesn't hurt, but this case seems so weak in its investigation, in its gathering of evidence, that I think they're sort of trying to grab anything they can grab to put some sort of cohesiveness to the case. I think the defense can make a lot out of that, saying like it just seems like, you know, red Solo cup to corroborate. It's not like saying a specific cup with somebody's initials on it or something like that. And you still got to get around. I mean, I haven't had many experiences where I'm driving in my car and someone gets out of the car after I beep them and walks over with a red Solo cup to like
to shake my hand.
Yeah,
it's not a common thing. I agree with you. And you know, obviously we even heard all the evidence. Obviously it would matter more if there was DNA from the cup that matched the deceased. You know, when we talk about this case, you know, obviously as those watching know, there was a trial before. And so, you know, when the witnesses take the stand, they're not testifying for the first time. They're testifying for the second, sometimes third time. And so the question becomes is, you know, when an individual has to testify multiple times, does it benefit the prosecution? Does it benefit the defense?
Becomes a chicken or the egg kind of question. I wrestle with that all the time because as a defense attorney, you say, oh great, if it's coming back on retrial or somebody else again, you have some things to cross-examine on. However, it also, you've already played your hand because as a defense attorney, you like to try to poke holes in their case, and once you poke them, they start tightening it up so those holes don't exist in the next proceeding, whatever it is. So I'm never really sure on that. It really depends. Yeah,
and it's a very good point. You know, sometimes you have witnesses that testify better even the second time around. Although I'm not so sure in this case that people would agree that Wendy Gimbales testified better the second time around. And so we're going to take a look at some clips of the cross-examination of this witness to see if there were times that the defense did a pretty good job of tripping her up. Let's take a look. And that you heard the defense cross-examining the witness about prior statement she made in regards to when it was that the deceased got out of the vehicle versus when the defendant got out of the vehicle. And I'm here with Mike Koribanics, and one of the things we always think about when a witness is testifying and they're not consistent or completely consistent with prior testimony or prior statements they made, you know, does that automatically mean that they're lying, or is it just kind of the natural progression of someone's memory that they're never going to remember everything the exact same way?
I always think you've got to have a plan on your cross-examination, and people don't want to see an attorney beating up on a witness because I think he loses his credibility or her credibility. Is you want to make sure that if you're going to show a prior inconsistent statement, it means something. It means something of a moment, not just to show this person's confused. But, you know, it's got to show, like sometimes if somebody says something different in trial and the prior inconsistent statement doesn't hurt you, why not just leave it alone?
Right, sure. Yeah, no, I agree with you, and I think, you know, look, I mean, there can be a series of inconsistent statements that, you know, add up to an individual having an inability to recall things, and then you end up questioning their ability, not that they're lying, but that they're just incapable of remember things clearly, and there at the end of the day you say, well, you can't rely on them to prove the defendant's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. I'm not sure. I think I agree with you that the cross-examination right now, although I think it's mildly effective, I'm not sure that the specific questions that are being asked of her and the inconsistencies are adding up to much in terms of nailing her in terms of her credibility. Let's take a look. I think we have some more clips and see how the defense is able to develop his cross-examination strategy. And that's the prior testimony of a Detective Schlosser from the Miramar Police Department on cross-examination. The court is in recess on the People or the Florida v. Armando Baptista. And so we're just taking a look at some testimony that some of the viewers may have missed. I'm here with Michael Koribanics. You know, I do have to say that at least the testimony of this witness certainly is helpful to the defense because he's basically laying out all the inconsistencies or the failures of the the main prosecution witness, to tell the detectives various things at a time when you would have expected her to be telling those things.
Well, there's always that jury instruction that you should really give more credibility if you choose, because the jury always has it in its province, to statements that were given closer to the event in time. I mean, here we're having, you know, there's a big lapse of time. There's a courtroom testimony that's pretty stale, and they're showing the inconsistencies of what's missing from the statements that she has said and was given at the time that were important then. But now it almost seems that the testimony may be manufactured, especially with the Solo cup.
Yeah, you know, now she did, it sounds like she may have brought the solo cup up. Obviously, she must have, because the detectives eventually came together. The detectives did recover it. You know, but again, you know, I think to me the biggest issue in this case when it comes to her testimony is how the jury is supposed to accept that he being Mohammed, Mohammed Knight, I apologize. Mohammed Knight exited the vehicle with the intent to shake the hands of the individuals in the other vehicle. And that's the part that I think most jurors are going to get lost on.
Well, I think that just is, that seems to come like right out from where snitch came. It just seems to come out of left field. And it makes no sense.
Right. I think, look, I think in a sense she appears to be covering for her boyfriend. But, you know, again, the jury's going to be the ones who decide whether or not she's telling the truth or not. We're going to go to a break and we'll be right back. And that's the testimony of Lisa Cruz. She was the technician that was out there videotaping the crime scene on the day of the death of Mr. Knight. And so one of the things she was able to testify to is the observation of various items that were around the crime scene that are arguably helpful to the defense. Those items being a hat, a broken bottle, things of that nature that may support the defense claim. I'm going to bring in Michael Koribanics. Thank you for being here and sticking with us through this. So, you know, look, I mean, anytime you have a prosecution witness testifying and they're basically giving you what you need, you must feel like you've had a good day.
That's a great day to have, and it's a great day to have when you have a crime scene investigator, somebody who's basically like forensic, gives somebody what they see on TV,
right? And
it's not somebody who's just saying what you want, but they're giving hard facts that fall into your theory of defense. You can't ask for anything better.
Sure. I mean, and at the end of the day, it really is her word against the defendant's word, because there's no other evidence. So when you start to hear all this other additional evidence, it's helpful. So let's take a look at Lisa Cruz. And that was Lisa Cruz testifying, and so I'm here with Michael Koribanics. You know, one of the things she testified to is that she doesn't know if fingerprints were recovered from the vehicle, and she also testified that she didn't see the red Solo Cup that seems to, I think we should call it the red Solo Cup case, because that seems to be the most dominant feature of this case. What do you think about that?
Well, I think the defense is doing a good job. I mean, when the prosecution puts forward a witness like a crime scene technician, somebody like that, they're trying to give their case this aura of scientific knowledge and things of that nature. And when they put someone on like this, and the defense attorney could get them to say, "I don't recall, I don't know," I think it gives a twofold positive response for the defense. Number one is, you collected it, don't you care about it? And the other part is that it just seems they didn't complete their job. So I think it's effective.
Right. I'm not sure. I think we have some technical difficulties going on here. Let's go to break. We'll be right back. And that was the testimony, a previous testimony of Wendy Jambalis. I'm here with Mike Koribanics. You know, one of the things we saw from the witness is emotion. And obviously, at the end of the day, especially if the jury does not hear from the defendant, they're going to be basing their decision on the testimony of this one witness, coupled with whatever corroboration exists or whatever corroboration does not exist. You know, do you think emotion kind of you know, has an impact on the jury, and if it does, what impact do you think it has?
I think it has a great impact on the jury, and I think going back to what you were talking about earlier about inconsistencies, showing that you can't trust or you can't understand, you can't believe what someone said, not necessarily believe, but it doesn't really raise to the point of beyond a reasonable doubt. I think when someone gets emotional like that on the stand, it becomes less sterile, and people are like, wait a minute, she saw someone get murdered, right, killed, aggravated manslaughter, whatever you want to call it. Somebody died in her presence, and it was emotional, and I don't know if I'm going to grade every mistake she has as a subtraction from the state. that could be a big problem. And in that sense, her emotion seems real.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I think one of the things is, you know, does she have a motive to lie? Obviously, the deceased was her loved one. So there's a motive there, but she's not protecting him from going to jail. There is an argument to be made that she's trying to tell the jury exactly what went down as objectively as she can. And then the other argument is that who has the most to gain and the most to lose is the defendant if he were to get up and take the stand. So, you know, I think it's, you know, I think anytime emotion comes into play, a jury's going to be influenced. I think it's the job of the prosecution and the job, in this case, of the defense to make sure that the jury understands that you can feel whatever you want, you can cry if you want, but you can't allow that to impact your ability to make a fair and impartial decision with regards to the results.
Well, absolutely. And I'm sure the defense in this case, when they sum up to the jury, is going to say, listen, the events were horrible here, and you should be emotional, but you've taken a promise in your deliberations not to let emotion enter into it. That's where a good defense attorney always puts a check on that without dehumanizing himself or his client, but says we understand emotion, but there's no place for it here, today, tomorrow, until this trial's over.
I agree with you, and I think we've been at Law&Crime for a while, and we've seen so many cases where, honestly, the moment like a loved one speaks, I think everyone kind of goes, we're done here, and I think the defense probably feels incredibly deflated, because how do you get past that? And I think it's such a difficult job for a defense attorney, especially in a case where someone has died in fairly gruesome or tragic circumstances, because no one's arguing that he was a horrible guy, whether you believe her or not. Still an individual died over nonsense, which is like an argument from two vehicles. And so I think it's always kind of tough for the defense to, you know, kind of get the jury to, in a sense, keep their eyes on the ball, if you will.
Absolutely. The big part is, you know, people forget we're defense attorneys, but we're human too. And, you know, you do. It affects you. We're human. It's, you know, the experienced defense attorney who gets up, takes a deep breath, and goes and says, you know, I'm not here to beat this person up. I'm just here to get the facts out, be respectful, and defend my client. But most of all, defend your client.
And so, you know, we're following this case, and obviously the jury is in a recess. And as you know, there was a previous trial that went on. That was with Demetrius Elder. He was the first defendant that went on trial. And the main witness, Wendy Jimbalis, testified at that trial. And we're going to take a look now at her testimony in that original trial.
See the passenger doing as the passenger came out of the car?
He had his door wide open, and he was standing with his back against the door.
Okay. Did you see the two of them walk towards each other?
Not at that point. He
At
stood
what-
there for a minute.
Okay, then you describe it to us. What did you see once you saw Muhammad walking towards the car in front of you and the passenger out of the car?
As Muhammad started talking to him, Muhammad stopped towards the back of the vehicle. The passenger eventually approached him and kept a distance of about 10 feet between them. And Muhammad did most of the talking. The passenger, I never saw him say a word. And at one point, Muhammad turned his body to come back towards the car, switched hands with the solo cup, and he extended his hand over his body and down and out, like he was going to shake his hand.
What did you see happen when Muhammad extended his hand like he was going to shake his hand?
The passenger stepped forward and he swung up and at Muhammad. I saw blood fly.
What did Muhammad do at that second?
I saw Muhammad throw up his left hand in a block, and the right hand, the solo cup flew, and his right hand in a fist, and he hit the passenger on the face, towards the lip, and that was his one and only punch.
Where are you? We're going to go through it slow. Where are you now? Are you still in your car?
I actually open up the door, and I've got
And that was the testimony of Wendy Jimbalis. We're going to be wrapping up, and I'm going to be finishing. After I leave, you're going to be hearing from Aaron Keller, who's going to be doing the daily debrief, and Mike's going to stay on with him to discuss some of the big crime stories. Thank you for being here at Law and Crime, and hope to see you again soon.